In this video, we'll be covering the CAM for the 3-axis standard part example. So the first thing we need to do is go up to Modules, New CAM Job. We're going to choose Milling. We're going to select our 3-axis machine, and we're going to click the Stock Wizard. Now we're just going to use rectangular stock, and at first we're going to use the bounding box and auto from the workspace, so it's just going to automatically create the stock for us. But what we're going to do is change it to a different size. So we click Enter, enter the value in X of 4.125. The width in Y is 2.75, and then the height for Z is going to be 1.25. And then we can go ahead and just hit Next. And then for our origin, we're going to go ahead and just click the Origin button, and then click this back left corner top of part point that's created for us when we get to that third page. And then we're going to come down and click on Work Offset. Now these values are important to create proper simulation when using the Machine Simulation Pro. These values shift the part location on the virtual machine inside of the simulation. So for our X, we're going to go ahead and put it at -2. And then for our Y, we're going to say -1.25. And then in Z, so we shift it up, we're going to say 3 inches, +3 up, so it's going to shift the whole thing up off the table. And then we'll just hit OK. And then in our machine setup, we're just going to hit OK again. And we're going to right click on Machine Setup and do Mill 2-axis. So the first thing we're going to cut, we're going to go select our geometry. So before I pick my geometry, I'm going to right click on my milling stock and just say blank. And then rotate my part upside down so I see the bottom of it. That way I can hover over this edge and just right click and say Constant Z, and it's going to pick the edge that I want to cut. We're just doing the profile around this. And then go back to isometric view by hitting Control-7, and then right click and hit OK. Go Next. So we're going to pick our top of feature here. This is going to be the top. We're going to pick our total depth down to here, and then we'll go ahead and hit Next. For our profile, we're just going to use a profile rough and a finish, and then go Next. No changes for the work offset, and then we're going to set up our tools. Now the first tool I'm using is actually the one that Bobcat picks for us. It's the 1/2-inch flat end mill. So I'm just going to hit Next. And then for patterns, we're going to go ahead and choose a contour ramp so it works its way around the part in X, Y, and Z. And then hit Next. Our side allowance is good. This is going to be what we're saving for the side, for the finish pass, and then the bottom allowance we'll leave at 0 so it cuts it all the way to depth. And then for our depth options, as it works its way around, we're going to do a depth per pass, and we're going to make our depth of cut 0.125, and then just hit Next. For our leads, we have an option for plunge and ramp, so we're going to go ahead and ramp into the part with an angle of approach of 8 degrees, and then just go ahead and hit Next. And then we're not going to make any changes to the corner type, so we'll hit Next. No changes to the machine sequence. We'll hit Next, and then we have to pick our finish tool. So we'll go up to our tool crib, go to End Mill Finish, add from the tool library, and we're going to sort by the diameter and look for our 375 standard tool. So click OK, and then hit OK. And after we have our 3/8 tool added in, we're just going to go ahead and compute from here. So we're going to hit Compute, and we'll see that our tool path shows up on the inside of the part. So to change that, we're going to right click on Default Chain Start Point, reverse our direction, and then recompute all our tool path. And now we have our tool path for that part. So then we'll come in and blank out our tool path and minimize it. And then right click on Machine Setup, go down to Mill Drill Hole. And then for our geometry for the holes, we're going to go ahead and say Select Geometry. We're going to pick the inside section of both those holes. You can't pick the tops because it's curved. So then you'll right click and hit OK. And then we have our holes. And then our total depth for the holes, we're going to click on the holes we want to change and then make our depth 1.1. And then hit Next and Next. And then we're going to go ahead and pick our ream feature. Click Next. Next. I'm going to use the center drill that Bobcat chooses for me. And then hit Next. Depths are fine. We'll go Next again. We have the system tool that Bobcat pulls up for the drill before we ream. And we'll just use the default and hit Next. This time we are going to peck the drilling. So we're just going to say peck and then go Next. And then our reamer picks the right size for those holes. Go Next. And we're all done. So then we hit Compute. And we will see the drilled holes through the part. So then we'll right click on our feature mill hole, blank it out, and shrink it up. And then now it's time to cut this pocket. So we're going to right click on Machine Setup, go down to Mill 2-axis, select our geometry, and we're going to go down to our layers and turn on our pocket geometry. Hold Shift and actually just pick the edge of the pocket, and then right click and hit OK. and then go next. We need to pick the depth of this pocket now. So when we say pick bottom, we can go in and just pick the bottom of that from the top of the part down. Go next. We're going to go ahead and choose pocketing with a pocket and a profile finish. Go next, next. And then for the tool, we're going to go up to our tool crib. We're going to go over to end mill finish and select that 375 tool that we used for our finish earlier, and then hit OK. Go next. We're going to go ahead and run an advanced pocket with adaptive roughing, so high speed machining, and then next. And then for our depth, we're going to go ahead and do multiple steps, and I want to do this in 5 cuts. So what I'm going to do is just say 0.75 divided by 5, click out of that box, and it's going to enter that value in for me. All these boxes are calculators, so it's just going to calculate it for me. Then I hit next for my leads. We're going to go ahead and ramp in, and then hit next for our machine sequence. We're not going to make any changes, and then hit next again. We're going to change this to an 1/8 inch tool, so we're going to go up to our tool crib, go to end mill finish, and just select our 1/8 inch tool out of there, and then hit OK. Go next, next. No changes on the parameters because we're just finishing the wall. Our lead, we're going to leave as the default. Hit next, next, and then just hit compute. And then we have our pocket all finished up. So we're going to come over here. We can turn the pocket back off on our layers, and then right click on feature 2 axis, and then blank on blank toolpath, and then shrink it up. And then we'll right click on machine setup, go down to mill 3 axis. And then for our geometry of the 3 axis, we're going to go ahead and hit select geometry, but we're going to come over to our CAD tree, and we're going to click on extrude cut. We're going to leave that one there, but we're going to come into the first and second extrude cuts, and we're going to say suppress, unsuppress, and it's just going to hide those features for us so that we don't have to worry about it later. So we're just going to suppress it, and then go ahead and select the entire model. So we'll click all, and then right click and hit OK, and then go next, next. And then for the toolpath we're going to run, we're going to go ahead and choose the planar toolpath, and then we're going to come over here and click planar and add a second one to this. So then we'll hit next, next. We're going to set up our tool. Let's go up to our tool crib. For our roughing tool, we're going to go and add a tool from the library. We're going to sort by our diameter, and we want to choose our 1/2 inch ball end mill, and then just hit OK, and then hit OK again. So then we can hit next. For our patterns, we're going to go ahead and leave a zigzag with a lace angle of 90 degrees, and then go next. Our parameters, we're going to change our step over amount to an 1/8 inch, and then we're going to change our step down also to an 1/8 inch, so 0.125. Go next. We're not going to change any leads. We're not going to change any options or links. And then we get to our second planar. So for our second planar, we're going to go up to our tool crib and select that 1/2 inch ball end mill. And then the only thing we're going to change in here, we're just going to skip through all this until we get to the step over. We're going to make our step over 0.01. And then go next, 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 till we run out of nexts, and then hit compute. And then we're going to see our toolpath show up on the part. So then we're on to our final toolpath. We'll go back to an isometric view and fit all. I'm going to blank out my 3 axis. So we're just going to say blank on blank toolpath, and then shrink it up. And then I can actually come over here to my layers. I'm going to put my check mark on my text layer, turn off solids, and turn on text. And then I can right click and say mill 2 axis, select my geometry. I'm just going to select that entire shape, hit OK, go next. Our total depth on this, we're just going to go 0.01 deep, and then go next. For this one, we're going to do some engraving. Go next, next. And then for our tool, we're going to go up to our tool crib. We're going to click on V tool this time and say add a tool from the library. And then we want to go ahead and pick this 1/8 inch 30 degree included angle total, and then hit OK. And then hit OK one more time. And then we can go ahead and hit next. Our parameters, it's just our total depth. We'll just go ahead and compute it. And there is all our toolpath. So if I go and unblank everything, we can see all of the toolpath. Bring up our solid model, we'll see everything. Let me turn off that text. And then come back to our CAD tree, and before we do anything to actually run this, we're going to right click on our first extrude cut and say suppress, unsuppress. And then our second extrude cut, suppress, unsuppress. And those two things are going to show back up for us. And then we can go ahead and load up the simulation. And then turn off our toolpath and hit play. And just watch this whole thing rough out and get all cut out. So here's our pocket. And then we're just going to drill, Slow this down a little bit. And then we're coming in and finishing the whole part right here. And because we suppress that, it's not even looking at that pocket. It's just cruising right across it. And then we exit the simulation, come back in here, hit Control 7, make sure we're isometric, and then fit all. And that concludes the video on the 3-axis standard CAM example.